Welcome to The Psychology of Us. This podcast is created by R.J. Starr, a public intellectual and independent psychology educator. The material presented is educational and interpretive, examining psychological life as a domain of understanding rather than intervention. It does not provide therapy, diagnosis, or professional guidance. Each episode stands as a complete work of public psychological inquiry.
Picture this. You are sitting across the table from someone.
Like a relative at a holiday dinner, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. The plates have just been cleared, the coffee's being poured. Or maybe it's an old friend you haven't seen in a decade and you're just catching up over a drink.
Right, a totally normal setting.
Completely normal. The conversation is flowing normally, and then almost out of nowhere, it just veers into a conspiracy theory.
And we aren't talking about a mild suspicion here.
No, not at all. I don't mean a passing suspicion about, like, a politician lying. I mean a full-blown, elaborate, structurally complex narrative.
Oh, yeah. The really deep stuff.
Right. We are talking about hidden global cabals, intricately coordinated international events, secret symbols embedded in corporate logos, the whole 9 yards.
It can be pretty jarring when that happens.
It really is.
Yeah.
So you do what you as a rational person think is the right thing to do. You feel a little surge of adrenaline.
You pull out your phone under the table.
Exactly. You pull out your phone, you find the objective facts, and you gently present the logic. You show them the primary source evidence that completely, unequivocally debunks what they are saying.
You lay it out like a lawyer.
Yeah, like a watertight case. And what happens? You hit an absolute brick wall.
It never works.
It never works. Not only do they not change their mind, but the very act of you showing them evidence somehow seems to make them even more convinced that they are right.
It's a fascinating backfire effect.
It's wild. They look at you not with a sense of revelation, but with Betty. They think you are hopelessly blind to the real truth.
And that is incredibly frustrating for you.
Oh, it's exhausting. You walk away from that interaction just thinking, how can someone who is otherwise so smart, so capable in their daily life be so completely irrational?
Well, that's exactly what we are going to explore.
Yes. Today, we are going to find out exactly why that happens. And I have to tell you, it completely changes everything we think we know about human reasoning. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Today, we are immersing ourselves in a really profound structural analysis. It's by Professor R.J. Starr, an independent psychology educator and scholar.
It's a phenomenal piece of work.
It really is. The text we are unpacking is called The Psychological Architecture of Conspiracy Thinking. And our mission for this deep dive is to shift the frame entirely.
We need to look at this from a completely new angle.
Right. We're going to move completely away from the idea that conspiracy thinking is a cognitive deficit or a lack of intelligence or, some sort of bizarre software glitch in the human brain.
Instead, we are exploring a pretty radical concept.
A totally mind-blowing concept. The idea that it is actually a highly functional system-level response to profound instability.
And to build on that foundation, I want to establish our coordinates for the listener right away. We are adopting a very specific lens today.
Yeah, let's set the ground rules.
We are not here to catalog incorrect ideas. We are not conducting a fact-checking exercise on any specific conspiracy theory floating around the internet.
Right, that's not the point of this at all.
Exactly. Nor are we evaluating the truth or falsehood of specific claims. Our goal is entirely structural.
So we're looking at the framework itself.
We are aiming to map the underlying psychological architecture of the human mind when it is placed under immense sustained pressure.
That pressure cooker environment.
Yes. We are looking at the precise environmental and cognitive conditions under which a highly complex, seemingly irrational explanation becomes not just persuasive to a person, but psychologically stabilizing.
Wow. Psychologically stabilizing. That's a huge phrase.
It is. Starr's work is a structural analysis. That means we are examining the load-bearing pillars of human perception, the biological realities of emotion, and the mechanics of identity formation.
I love that framing. We are looking at the blueprints of the mind rather than, arguing over the paint colors on the walls.
That's a great way to put it.
So here is the roadmap for our journey today. We are going to trace the exact progression of this architecture, step by intricate step.
It's quite a progression.
It is. We will start with what happens when the world simply stops making sense, what Starr calls perceptual strain. We will look at how that feels physically and mentally.
The physical aspect is key.
Yeah. Then we will transition into the intense emotional panic that cognitive strain triggers in the human body. From there, we will watch the mind desperately construct a narrative to save itself from that panic.
The construction phase.
Right. And finally, we will explore how that freshly constructed narrative ends up swallowing a person's entire identity, turning them into that impenetrable brick wall at the dinner table.
It is definitely a wild ride.
It's a really wild ride. So, to understand how conspiracies take hold, we first have to discard our primary default misconception about how the human mind actually works, don't we?
We do. And Starr's opening premise requires a complete paradigm shift for most people.
How so?
Well, he argues that treating conspiracy thinking as an error or viewing it simply as a susceptibility to misinformation is a profound surface-level mistake.
It's just the wrong diagnosis entirely.
Fundamentally wrong. Think about what an error actually is in cognitive terms. If it were just an error, like getting a multiplication problem wrong or misremembering a historical date,
Then correcting the facts would resolve the issue.
exactly, you would show the person the correct equation or the historical document, and their brain would process the new data.
They'd recognize the discrepancy.
Right. They would say, I see my mistake, and update their belief.
But as I pointed out in that opening scenario at the dinner table, that categorically does not happen with conspiracy narratives.
No, it doesn't. The beliefs persist in the face of overwhelming contradictory evidence.
And often, they become even more elaborate to accommodate the new facts you just introduced.
Right. This behavioral pattern tells us unequivocally that the phenomenon we are observing is not happening at the level of content.
So it's not about the specific facts of the theory.
Not at all. Something much more fundamental, much more deeply rooted is occurring at the level of structure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if it's not a failure of intelligence, and it's not a simple data entry error in the brain, what is it?
We really have to look at how the mind actually operates on a day-to-day, second-by-second basis.
Right. I think we tend to intuitively view our eyes and ears like a high-definition video camera.
That's the common assumption, yeah.
We assume we are just passively hitting record on reality, taking in the raw, unfiltered data of the world exactly as it exists in physical space.
But Starr points out that the mind doesn't passively record anything.
It actively constructs. It acts as what he calls an interpretive engine.
An active interpretive engine.
Yeah. So if the mind isn't a video camera passively recording, it's more like, well, think of an exhausted film editor.
I like this analogy.
Imagine an editor sitting in a dark room trying to cut a coherent, linear, 2-minute movie trailer out of, like, 10,000 hours of random, chaotic, completely unorganized footage.
And they have to do it in real time.
Exactly. Every single second of every day.
The film editor analogy captures the mechanics of the process perfectly. Perception is absolutely not a simple intake of sensory data.
It's way more active than that.
It is a massive, relentless, and ongoing process of selection, filtering, and compression.
Compression is a great word for it.
Consider the sheer volume of data existing in the world at any given millisecond. The world is infinitely complex.
It's just too much information.
Way too much. If your brain attempted to consciously process every single sensory input, every photon of light hitting your retina, every microscopic fluctuation in temperature.
Every background sound.
Right, let alone the potential social and physical consequences of every single action you take, you would be entirely paralyzed.
You literally wouldn't be able to muster the cognitive resources to walk across the street.
Exactly. So this interpretive engine has a biological mandate. It must filter out the noise.
It has to, just to survive.
It aggressively compresses the complexity of reality, throws away what it deems irrelevant, and assembles what's left into a streamlined narrative.
And this narrative is what allows you to navigate your environment smoothly, right? To make decisions and to survive without being crushed by the sheer weight of total environmental awareness.
Precisely.
And what's wild is that most of the time, we have absolutely no idea this editor is working in the background.
It's completely invisible to us.
We don't feel the cuts being made.
That invisible operation is the hallmark of a healthy, functioning interpretive engine. Under stable conditions, this rigorous editing process operates largely outside of our conscious awareness.
The cuts are seamless.
The world feels continuous, it feels highly intelligible, and it is sufficiently predictable.
You wake up in the morning and you know how the fundamental rules of society work.
You know how your job functions, you understand the basic, reliable, cause and effect relationships of your daily routine.
Like if you turn the tap, water comes out.
Mm-hmm.
If you work, you receive a paycheck.
Right. The mind is efficiently and quietly organizing your experience into a coherent whole.
However, and this is the absolute crux of STAR's first major structural point.
Yes.
This feeling of stability is conditional. It is not guaranteed.
It heavily depends on the external environment not exceeding the interpretive engine's capacity to do its job.
Which naturally brings up a terrifying scenario. What happens when the conditions are no longer stable?
That's where the breakdown begins.
What happens when the volume and the sheer tangled complexity of the information coming at us completely shatters the mind's ability to filter it?
And that's exactly what we're seeing today.
Because looking around at the modern era, that feels remarkably like the world we are living in right now.
It is the defining characteristic of our current era. And this introduces STAR's concept of cognitive strain.
Cognitive strain. Okay.
When the volume of information, the complexity of that information, or the sheer number of contradictions within that incoming data exceeds the cognitive system's capacity to organize it, your actual experience of reality begins to shift.
And it is crucial to understand that this is not just a passing feeling of being confused about a specific topic.
No, not at all. The foundational structure of how you perceive the world starts to fracture.
The background editor just can't keep up.
Exactly. The patterns you used to rely on become much harder to discern. Causality, the most basic human understanding of what causes what to happen, becomes suddenly opaque.
Things just stop making sense.
Events that once appeared logically connected begin to fragment and isolate.
So the exhausted film editor is literally drowning in footage.
Yeah.
The film strips are spilling out of the bins, the editing software is crashing, and the timeline makes absolutely no sense.
That is the exact internal state. And in these conditions, the interpretive engine does not possess a mechanism to simply pause and say, I need a break to catch up.
Because the world keeps happening.
The world keeps happening, so the engine strains. It pushes itself harder, trying to force coherence onto an increasingly incoherent data set.
And here we must look critically at the contemporary informational environment.
Yes, the environment is key.
STAR argues forcefully that our modern digital landscape doesn't just happen to amplify this natural cognitive strain, it structurally precipitates it.
It is the catalyst.
Think deeply about the architecture of digital platforms, social media, and modern news aggregation.
They are designed to deliver information in ways that actively, aggressively resist coherent integration.
The content is hyperfragmented, it is incredibly high volume.
And it is algorithmically curated to break sequential logic.
And most importantly, the entire system is optimized for emotional engagement, not for cognitive intelligibility.
That's a huge point.
I want you, the listener, to think about your own doom-scrolling habits for a second. Put yourself in that physical space.
We've all been there.
You are lying in bed, swiping through a feed. You see a devastating, highly complex piece of global geopolitical news.
Then you swipe.
A split second later, you swipe, and you are watching a deeply polarizing political argument between two strangers.
Swipe again.
You swipe again, and it's an ad for a blender. You swipe again, and it's a terrifying statistic about the climate.
It is relentless, context-free, and totally disjointed.
But wait, I want to push back on this a little bit.
Yeah.
I hear what Starr is saying about the internet, but hasn't the world always been immensely complicated?
It has.
I mean, let's think about a farmer living in the 14th century. That person had to deal with the bubonic plague, completely unpredictable weather that could starve their family, localized wars, corrupt lords.
Their world was definitely terrifying and complex.
Right. So why does this specific modern digital fragmentation cause what Starr refers to as a loss of legibility? Why are we uniquely breaking down now?
That is a phenomenal question, and it highlights a crucial distinction that Starr makes deeply explicit.
What's the distinction?
He specifically clarifies the profound difference between uncertainty and legibility.
Uncertainty versus legibility.
A world can be highly uncertain, just like your hypothetical 14th century farmer facing a terrible drought, but that world can still be entirely legible.
Meaning they still understand how it works.
Exactly. The farmer certainly doesn't know if it will rain next week, which creates massive anxiety, but they fundamentally understand the basic mechanics of their reality.
They know what rain is. They know what crops are.
Right. They understand the direct cause and effect relationship between water, soil, and food. The parameters of their world make structural sense, even if the outcomes within that world are highly dangerous or uncertain.
That makes a lot of sense. So what's different now?
What we are facing today in the digital age is fundamentally different. We are experiencing a profound loss of legibility.
Legibility is the baseline ability to understand how the pieces of the world fit together at all.
Exactly. Today's digital cognitive strain destroys that baseline. As an average citizen, you are constantly exposed to highly abstract, global, deeply contradictory information across multiple complex domains.
Like macroeconomics, international supply chains, advanced biotechnology, global political shifts.
Yes. Furthermore, this information doesn't arrive in a structured, educational sequence. It arrives layered, fragmented, and deliberately unresolved.
So, if I'm understanding the distinction, it's not just that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, which is uncertainty.
Right.
Is that we literally do not understand how the pieces of today fit together. We don't understand the mechanisms driving the events we are witnessing.
The clear distinction between a meaningful signal and random noise just evaporates.
The evaporation of that distinction is exactly what defines a loss of legibility.
And when legibility declines to a certain threshold, the mind's pattern recognition system, that vital interpretive engine we discussed, simply cannot function as intended.
The cognitive structure that previously allowed for safe interpretation becomes highly unreliable.
You encounter multiple competing narratives online every single day.
Right, and each one is designed to be partially persuasive, utilizing selective facts.
But none of them are fully sufficient to explain the entirety of the complex reality you're experiencing.
So you try to reconcile these conflicting inputs. You try to merge the narrative about inflation with a narrative about global trade and the narrative about domestic policy.
But the engine can't do it. It doesn't produce closure.
The system is fundamentally straining under the weight of a fragmented, illegible reality.
Exactly.
And this is where the theory takes a really visceral turn. Because that cognitive strain, that failure of the interpretive engine, isn't just an abstract math problem happening in a silicon computer.
No, it is happening in a biological human body.
Which means this failure to compute reality quickly, almost seamlessly, transitions into a physical, physiological, emotional crisis.
This transition is arguably the most critical juncture in STAR's architecture. This is where we move from mere perceptual instability into a state of profound emotional urgency.
Because the body reacts to it.
The loss of interpretive stability does not sit quietly in the brain as a detached philosophical puzzle to be pondered at leisure.
It's not just a thought experiment.
When ambiguity persists, when the world remains illegible for an extended period, it is not experienced by the human nervous system as neutral.
It is experienced as unsettled, escalating anxiety.
The biological system registers a critical loss of coherence, and hand in hand with that, a terrifying loss of orientation.
It's that deep, gnawing feeling in your gut of something is fundamentally wrong, something massive is happening around me, and I have absolutely no idea what it is or how to protect myself.
It is an agonizing, exhausting feeling to carry around.
It is fundamentally destabilizing to the organism.
STAR refers to this specific state as affective activation.
Affective activation.
When the environment becomes persistently illegible, the emotional regulatory system doesn't just feel a sense of mild curiosity. It treats the lack of predictability as a literal physical threat to survival.
So your biological vigilance skyrockets. Cortisol floods the system.
Your attention becomes incredibly narrow and highly focused, frantically scanning the environment for relevant cues to reestablish safety.
And because you don't know where the threat is coming from, you become hyper-attuned to anomalies, right?
Exactly. To anything that deviates even slightly from an expected pattern.
You're constantly asking, is this the thing that's going to hurt me? Is this the clue that explains everything?
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because STAR identifies a massive, completely silent shift that happens deep inside the brain under this intense emotional pressure.
What kind of shift?
When the anxiety gets high enough, when that affective activation reaches a boiling point, the mind's core priority fundamentally changes.
What to what?
In a normal state, your priority is maintaining openness, gathering accurate information, and updating your worldview.
That makes sense.
But under this strain, the new overriding priority is restoring coherence and achieving emotional resolution at absolutely any cost.
Oh. At any cost.
The question the brain is desperately asking is no longer what is objectively true. The only question that matters now is what narrative will make this terrible, burning feeling of uncertainty go away.
I cannot overstate how profound and biologically driven that shift is. It changes the entire paradigm of how we view reasoning.
It really does. Under stable conditions, your interpretive system balances multiple, sometimes competing goals.
Like it strives for accuracy, it can tolerate a fair amount of ambiguity.
And it is willing to expend energy to revise its beliefs based on new data.
But under sustained affective pressure.
That state of hyperactivation is metabolically and psychologically demanding. It literally drains your body's energy reserves.
You cannot live in a state of peak cortisol forever. It will destroy you.
So the biological system is overwhelmingly compelled to produce a structure, any structure, to lower the metabolic cost of that chronic, exhausting anxiety.
Consequently, the actual criteria by which your brain evaluates logic and reasoning changes.
Explanations that provide immediate total closure suddenly become vastly more attractive, more neurologically rewarding than nuanced, complex explanations that prolong the state of uncertainty.
So if I want to translate this into a biological imperative, the brain is essentially throwing its hands up and saying, I am burning way too many calories, I am taking too much physical damage, being terrified about not understanding the world.
I need an answer.
Right. I don't care if the answer is completely bizarre. If it turns off the alarm bells in my nervous system, I am taking it.
That completely reframes conspiracy thinking.
It's not a pathology. It's not a disease of the mind.
Precisely the opposite. It is a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. It is the direct result of the activation of threat sensitivity.
Because to the evolutionary human organism, the absence of an explanation is functionally equivalent to the presence of a deadly risk.
If you cannot predict the behavior of your environment, you cannot survive in it. You will be eaten or you will starve.
Therefore, the psychological movement toward an overarching explanation isn't an optional, leisurely intellectual exercise that someone engages in for fun.
No, it is biologically compelled by the organism's desperate need for a workable, predictable model of reality. The brain forces the issue.
Wow. Driven by this desperate, overriding emotional need to make the anxiety stop, the mind goes into absolute overdrive to solve the puzzle of reality.
And if the puzzle pieces don't fit together naturally because the world is actually chaotic and fragmented,
The mind is going to pull out a hammer and force them together.
that is the perfect segue into the next structural phase, the process of pattern completion under severe construct.
Pattern completion. Okay, so how does that work under pressure?
As we established, pattern detection is fundamental to human learning and adaptation. We are built to find patterns. It's how we learn to track seasons and hunt.
Right.
But under these specific conditions of intense cognitive strain and high effective pressure, the internal thresholds for what counts as a meaningful pattern drop drastically.
The filter fails.
The filter fails completely.
The barrier to entry for what the brain accepts as evidence just hits the absolute floor. It will take anything.
Anything that offers a connection. Connections that, under normal, relaxed conditions, might have been instantly dismissed by the interpretive engine as mere coincidence, are suddenly elevated to a status of deep, profound significance.
So, disparate, totally unrelated events from entirely different domains of life are pulled together and held simultaneously in the working memory.
The mind, desperate for resolution, forces an underlying structure onto them.
It moves from a state of calm, confident interpretation to a state of desperate, hyperactive search.
And because it needs an answer immediately, it works with whatever fragmented, algorithmically delivered materials it happens to have on hand.
I'm trying to visualize how this actually feels to the person experiencing it. It reminds me of, okay, imagine you were sitting in a dark room
Okay.
and you're staring at an old television screen that has lost its signal. It is just playing static. Millions of tiny random black and white dots, snow just flashing on the screen.
I can picture that.
If you stare at that static long enough and your brain is utterly desperate for a meaningful input, you will eventually start recognizing distinct shapes.
You will see faces in the static.
Exactly. If you keep staring, you might even start seeing complex movement or believing you can discern a plot line playing out in the noise.
And you aren't seeing this because there is an actual hidden broadcast happening beneath the static.
You are seeing it purely because the human brain fundamentally cannot tolerate meaninglessness. It abhors a vacuum of data.
It will actively construct a shape out of the random noise just to have something concrete to hold on to.
That is an incredibly vivid and highly accurate illustration of what Starr technically refers to as overfitted coherence.
Overfitted coherence, that's a concept from data science, right?
If we look at the field of data science, an overfitted model is a very specific type of error. It occurs when an algorithm is trained too aggressively on a specific set of data.
It ends up explaining that specific training data extremely well, but it does so by treating the random, meaningless noise within that data as if it were a critical predictive signal.
Right. It captures the real patterns, yes, but it also captures all the incidental, random static, treating every single data point as deeply meaningful and connected to the whole.
And when you apply an overfitted model to the real world, it fails because it thinks everything is a clue.
So if we apply that data science concept to human psychology, this overfitted coherence means a person creates an internal narrative that is incredibly, impossibly dense.
It connects literally everything they observe.
For example, they might notice the price of eggs going up at their local grocery store.
Okay.
Later that day, they see a weird temporary glitch during a live news broadcast. Then, they notice a specific hand gesture made by a pop star at a concert.
And finally, they read a headline about a boring, bureaucratic geopolitical treaty being signed.
To a relaxed mind, these are four completely unrelated, random events.
But to a mind experiencing overfitted coherence, these events are woven together into one massive, unified, heavily structured theory.
The treaty caused the glitch, which was signaled by the pop star, to distract from the artificial manipulation of the egg prices.
The complexity of the narratives generated by this process is staggering.
And this is a crucial element to understand if you want to know why you hit that brick wall at the dinner table.
Because from the internal perspective of the individual experiencing this overfitted coherence, it does absolutely not feel like they are inventing or forcing connections.
It feels exactly like a brilliant, hard-won discovery. It feels like a moment of profound, illuminating clarity.
The veil has been lifted.
What was previously a terrifying, fragmented, illegible reality now suddenly appears unified, deeply interconnected, and perfectly legible.
And most importantly, returning to the biological imperative, this overfitted narrative is highly functional for the individual. It works.
Wait, I need to stop you there. It works in what way?
Well,
Because the facts of the narrative they just constructed are almost certainly totally wrong. The pop star doesn't control the price of eggs? How can a completely false model of reality be functional?
it works in terms of regulating the biological and emotional system. We have to separate objective truth from psychological utility. The constructed narrative successfully and almost instantly reduces the immense emotional pressure, the crippling anxiety, and the cortisol flood we talked about earlier.
The narrative holds the chaotic pieces of reality in place.
The intolerable tension created by perceptual instability is finally resolved. They can breathe again.
However, at this specific stage of narrative construction, the pattern still lacks one crucial, final element to make it permanently structurally sound, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
The overfitted model describes a highly interconnected, incredibly complex reality, but it lacks direction.
A massive global pattern without a cause is still just a massive, statistically impossible coincidence.
And the brain doesn't like coincidence.
Right. A coincidence doesn't help you predict the future.
To fully lock in this new, comforting, unified reality, the mind needs to figure out who is responsible for creating the pattern.
Someone has to be sitting in the driver's seat.
The plot needs an author.
Exactly, the progression star outlines. This marks the transition from merely observing complex, intertwined systems to the active assignment of hidden agency.
Hidden agency.
Narrative, by its very psychological nature, seeks direction and intentionality. It wants to know not just what is happening, but why it is happening and who is making it happen.
Now, under stable conditions, when our cognitive load is low, we can accept what we call system-level explanations.
We can comprehend that complex economic trends, overlapping social forces, and dense institutional dynamics interact in incredibly chaotic, unpredictable ways to produce specific outcomes in the world.
But let's be honest, system-level explanations are incredibly boring.
And more importantly, they're cognitively exhausting to process.
If I ask why my groceries are so expensive, and you tell me, well, the global supply chain was disrupted by a confluence of localized weather events in key agricultural zones.
Combined with a delayed labor shortage in the international shipping sector, exacerbated by shifting consumer demand models post-pandemic.
I mean, my eyes just glaze over. That requires a massive amount of patience and working memory to process and verify.
It requires immense cognitive patience. And crucially, system-level accounts leave a massive amount of ambiguity completely unresolved.
They highlight how much of the world is subject to random chance.
And for a brain that is already operating under severe strain, a brain that is desperate to reduce emotional pressure and find absolute certainty, system-level accounts are entirely unacceptable.
They do not close the interpretive loop. They do not turn off the alarm bells.
Therefore, the mind moves rapidly toward a different form of explanation, one that is immediate, easy to grasp, and highly psychologically efficient agency.
It locates the cause of the complex pattern within a specific intentional actor.
It finds a villain.
You blame someone.
Yes. It elegantly transforms a diffuse, complex, random set of global conditions into a deliberate, intentional sequence of events.
The bad things aren't just occurring randomly due to systemic friction. They are being produced deliberately by someone with a goal.
And Starr points out that this leap to intentionality is deeply, irrevocably rooted in our evolutionary biology.
Human beings possess a powerful, built-in cognitive bias toward intentional explanation. It is how our brains evolved to survive in the wild.
Okay, I have to jump in and play devil's advocate here. I understand the evolutionary psychology angle. The classic example is the rustle in the grass, right?
Yeah, the rustle in the tall grass.
If an early human is walking through the savannah and hears a rustle in the tall grass, they have two choices. They can assume it's just the wind, a system-level random process.
Or they can assume it's a lion, an intentional agent stalking them.
The evolutionary logic dictates that the cost of being wrong about the wind is zero. You just get a little spooked for no reason.
But the cost of being wrong about the lion, of ignoring an intentional agent, is death.
So we evolved to always assume the lion. Better safe than sorry.
I buy that entirely. But how in the world does a hardwired survival instinct to look for predators in the bushes translate to a modern citizen believing that a secret transnational cabal is running the global economy from an underground bunker?
There seem like two vastly, vastly different cognitive leaps.
It is a massive leap in content, but structurally, it is the exact same mechanism. What's fascinating here is the scaling of that precise evolutionary bias.
The scaling, right.
We established that the mind has just constructed a massive, overfitted pattern. It is connected the price of eggs, the news glitch, the pop star, and the geopolitical treaty.
Now, the interpretive engine must assign an agent to that pattern.
The fundamental rule is this. The scope of the perceived pattern dictates the scope of the required agent.
Oh, I see.
If the pattern your brain has constructed connects global technology platforms, international political shifts, and broad cultural movements, your brain must infer an actor that is powerful enough to manipulate all of those massive domains simultaneously.
You simply cannot blame a corrupt local mayor for a pattern that spans the entire globe.
The cause must be proportional to the effect. Therefore, your mind demands a globally coordinated, incredibly wealthy, and impossibly powerful group of actors to serve as the lion in the grass.
But wait, this brings up the most obvious logical flaw in any massive conspiracy theory.
What's that?
If this group of people is truly that powerful, if they control the media, the banks, the governments, and the pop stars, why can't we see them?
Why isn't there a paper trail? Why hasn't someone leaked the memos?
That specific question leads us to the most brilliant, entirely self-sustaining logic of the conspiratorial architecture.
Because these incredibly powerful actors aren't visibly coordinating these massive events in public, because there is no paper trail, the mind, committed to the pattern, logically assumes they must be actively, deliberately concealing themselves.
This inference forms a perfect, unbreakable, closed loop of logic. Let's trace it.
Okay, let's trace it.
First, the observed patterns suggest massive global coordination. Second, coordination on that scale implies incredibly powerful actors.
Third, the fact that we cannot see these actors is easily explained by their immense power to conceal their activities from the public.
Therefore, the complete lack of empirical evidence for the conspiracy becomes the ultimate, indisputable proof of exactly how powerful and well hidden the conspiracy truly is.
That is genuinely terrifying. The absence of evidence is magically logically transformed into the strongest possible evidence.
If I ask for proof and you don't have it, you just say, exactly, that proves how deep the cover-up goes.
That is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to argue against using standard logic.
It is structurally impenetrable from the outside. In this state, the nature of uncertainty fundamentally changes form.
For the individual, the terrifying, agonizing question of, is there an explanation for the chaos, is completely resolved.
The answer is yes, there is a cabal. The uncertainty is no longer existential.
It merely shifts to refining the minor details of an explanation that is already assumed to exist as bedrock fact. They might wonder which bank the cabal uses, but they never doubt the cabal exists.
And once this massive, agency-driven, perfectly closed narrative is constructed, we enter the final and most critical phase of Starr's entire psychological analysis.
Right, because we have to bring this back to the dinner table.
We do.
This incredibly complex belief doesn't just sit passively in a little folder in the back of the person's brain, like a fun piece of trivia about capital cities.
It doesn't remain an external theory that they just happen to find interest.
Over time, it becomes the primary lens through which they view absolutely everything. It fuses with their ego. It becomes who they are.
This is the critical transition from simply holding a belief to occupying a position. Starr formally terms this psychological shift epistemic positioning.
Epistemic positioning.
The individual is no longer just a neutral observer who has evaluated evidence and decided to believe a specific claim about the world. They undergo a profound identity reorganization.
They fundamentally begin to identify as someone who sees the truth.
They are awake, while the rest of society, including you, sitting across the dinner table, is hopelessly asleep, blind, or manipulated.
Their perception of daily events, their evaluation of incoming news, their moral judgments, their entire orientation to reality fully aligns with and is dictated by this constructed narrative.
Identity is such an overwhelmingly powerful force. It's not just a hobby.
It's the core engine of how you interact with the world, how you define your self-worth, how you choose your friends.
And let's talk about the modern context of this, because today, you don't have to build this massive, terrifying identity alone in your basement. You aren't isolated.
That is a vital environmental factor. This epistemic stance, this new identity as an enlightened truth seeker, is rapidly socially validated and massively accelerated by the architecture of digital communities.
The internet doesn't just provide fragmented information, it provides fully pre-assembled, highly refined narratives.
It provides a complex symbolic language and a shared vocabulary.
And most importantly, for a human being who was previously drowning in anxiety, it provides a deeply committed community of validation.
People who arrive at similar overfitted interpretations of the world find each other rapidly through algorithmic sorting.
They form insular networks, and within these networks, they constantly reinforce the structure of the narrative through shared language, mutual recognition, and collective amplification of new evidence.
You find your tribe. You went from feeling completely alone, terrified and confused by an illegible world, to suddenly being surrounded by thousands of people who tell you that you aren't crazy.
In fact, they tell you that you are brilliant, that you are a researcher, that you are one of the brave few who actually understands the universe.
That has to be an incredibly intoxicating, powerful feeling. It's a total reversal of the power dynamic.
It provides immense psychological stability and profound social reward. It completely normalizes the extreme perspective.
It artificially inflates confidence through the appearance of massive consensus like, if 10,000 people in this forum agree with me, it must be true.
And it embeds the belief deeply into a social system. The narrative is no longer just maintained by one person's anxious brain. It is collectively maintained and defended by a unified community.
So listener, I really want you to put yourself directly into those shoes for a second. Empathize with the structural reality of that position.
It's hard to do, but important.
Imagine your entire sense of self, your perceived intelligence, your primary community of friends online, your feeling of being a hero in a hidden war, and fundamentally, your total relief from that crushing existential dread and anxiety we talked about earlier.
Imagine all of that is tied directly, inextricably to this one massive narrative.
Now imagine what happens if I walk up to you at that dinner party, pull out my phone, and drop a stack of undeniable facts on the table that proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that your narrative is factually wrong.
What is my stack of facts actually asking you to do?
You have just perfectly illustrated what Starr refers to as the immense cost of revision.
And understanding this cost is exactly why your stack of facts will bounce off that brick wall every single time.
Consider what you are asking them to do. To abandon the conspiracy belief at this late stage would not just mean saying, oops, I made a minor cognitive error in my research.
The stakes are infinitely higher.
To accept your facts would mean systematically destroying their entire identity. It would mean instantly losing their social community and their peer support.
It would mean admitting that they were not an enlightened hero, but simply a frightened person who was deeply misled.
And most terrifyingly of all, on a purely biological level, it would mean relinquishing the structural coherence that saved them.
It would rip away the framework that holds their world together, instantly returning them to that agonizing, metabolically draining, terrifying state of perceptual strain and emotional panic that forced them into the narrative in the first place.
The human mind, designed for self-preservation, simply refuses to pay that apocalyptic cost. It will do whatever it takes to protect the structure.
It's cognitive bankruptcy. The price of being factually correct is total psychological collapse.
So because the cost of giving up the belief is so catastrophic, the mind has to build an impenetrable reactive fortress around it.
It has to design a defense system that neutralizes any incoming threat before it can damage the load-bearing pillars of the narrative.
Yes. And this brings us to the fascinating mechanics of what Starr calls self-sealing structures and their profound resistance to disconfirmation.
When a belief transitions from a mere idea into a load-bearing pillar of personal identity, the cognitive system actively regulates how that belief can be challenged.
The interpretive engine we talked about earlier is now heavily biased toward defense.
Incoming information is no longer encountered in a neutral, objective state. If a piece of evidence aligns with the narrative, it is accepted instantly, without scrutiny, and used to reinforce the walls.
But if a piece of evidence contradicts the narrative, like your stack of facts at the dinner table, it is not just casually ignored.
The mind works much harder than that. The contradictory evidence is actively, aggressively reinterpreted to preserve the overall structure.
Let's play this out. I love a good hypothetical.
Sure.
Say the narrative relies heavily on the idea that all major scientific institutions are deeply corrupt and are suppressing data about a specific chemical.
Okay, classic setup.
I'm at the dinner table, and I pull up a massive, peer-reviewed, independent study from the world's leading scientific institution that conclusively proves the chemical is safe.
In a normal debate, that study is a devastating blow.
Right. So how does the self-sealing structure neutralize it?
The neutralization process is almost instantaneous, and it relies on the internal logic of the conspiracy itself.
How so?
If the core premise of the narrative assumes that institutions are fundamentally corrupt and dedicated to manipulating data to hide the truth, then your report from an institution contradicting the conspiracy is not viewed as objective data.
It is instantly processed by their interpretive engine as further definitive proof of the institution's corruption.
They will look at your study and say, of course they published that. The cabal funds that institution. This study is exactly what a corrupt organization would produce to cover their tracks.
Wow. The contradiction does not break the system. It is effortlessly absorbed by it.
The self-sealing structure takes a direct attack and brilliantly transforms it into a confirmation of its own premise.
So what does this all mean for our understanding of these interactions? It reveals a truly fascinating, deeply counterintuitive paradox.
What's the paradox?
We often sit at that dinner table and think of conspiracy theorists as incredibly gullible. We think they lack basic critical thinking skills, or that they just blindly accept whatever they read online.
But based on what you were saying, they aren't devoid of skepticism at all.
In fact, they are absolutely overflowing with it. They are incredibly rigorously skeptical of every single piece of evidence you try to show them.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have hit on one of Starr's most insightful observations. This is what he terms asymmetrical skepticism.
Asymmetrical skepticism, that's a great term.
The cognitive capacity for doubt, for critical thinking, and for rigorous analysis does not disappear in a conspiracy thinker. It is merely hijacked, actively weaponized, and redirected entirely outward.
Under normal, healthy cognitive conditions, doubt operates inwardly as much as outwardly. You test your own beliefs, you look for flaws in your own logic, and you remain theoretically open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
But within a self-sealing system, the ego cannot afford the luxury of inward doubt. The structure is too fragile.
Therefore, all of that potent critical energy, all of that skepticism is assigned entirely to external sources.
It is deployed exclusively to interrogate and dismantle any information that threatens the internal narrative.
It's incredible. They will literally spend 40 uninterrupted hours forensically analyzing a 3-second blurry news clip, zooming in on shadows, cross-referencing timestamps, looking for the tiniest flaw or inconsistency to prove the media is lying.
But they will not spend 3 seconds questioning the fundamental, incredibly fragile premise of their own overarching worldview.
Exactly. And this is why, from their internal perspective, they experience themselves as highly critical, deeply rigorous, and profoundly skeptical independent thinkers.
They feel like they're doing the hard work of investigating reality.
But as Starr points out, the skepticism is entirely asymmetrical. It is distributed selectively, applied with brutal force to enemies, and completely suspended for allies.
And this structural reality is exactly why fact-checking, as a primary strategy, is entirely useless against a self-sealing system.
When you present facts, your arguments and your evidence are only engaging with the content of the belief. You are arguing about the details.
But the massive load-bearing structure that organizes that content, the structure born of anxiety and identity, remains perfectly untouchably intact.
To use a spatial metaphor, you are standing outside, arguing passionately about the arrangement of the furniture, while they are living safely inside a reinforced concrete bunker, looking at you through a periscope.
That's brilliant. That's exactly what it feels like.
Okay, we have covered an absolutely incredible amount of ground today. I feel like my own interpretive engine is running a little hot.
It's a lot to process.
Let's synthesize what we've learned and try to bring this all together.
Sounds good.
The stated mission of this deep dive was to shift the frame on how we understand conspiracy thinking. And looking at R.J. Starr's architecture, I think we've undeniably done that.
Conspiracy thinking is not a glitch in the software. It is a masterclass in cross-domain cognitive integration.
It is a highly effective, albeit wildly distorting psychological regulatory strategy.
It violently aligns a person's mind, their turbulent emotions, their core personal identity, and their desperate search for meaning all into one unified project.
And it does this to ensure survival in a world that has crossed what Starr so aptly calls the threshold of uncertainty.
It takes an unnavigable, terrifyingly complex, fragmented world and aggressively forces it to become navigable again.
That is the essential unifying takeaway of Starr's entire structural analysis. Conspiracy thinking operates as a deeply necessary solution to a systemic existential problem.
The problem is not a lack of intelligence. The problem is the unbearable experience of profound instability across multiple interacting domains of human psychology.
The overfitted narrative successfully reduces uncertainty, it brutally compresses complexity into a manageable story, and it provides a rigid framework where the panicked individual finally feels oriented and safe.
And here is the sobering reality. As long as that constructed narrative continues to effectively resolve that internal emotional instability, the biological and psychological system has absolutely every reason to maintain it.
It will defend it and reinforce it, regardless of whatever external facts you present at a dinner table.
So to you, the listener, the next time you find yourself sitting at that table, the next time you feel that familiar spike of frustration encountering someone deeply entrenched in a self-sealing conspiratorial narrative, pause.
Remember what is actually happening beneath the surface of their words.
You aren't just fighting a bad idea. You aren't just trying to correct a silly internet rumor.
You are actively engaging with a load-bearing psychological structure that was desperately, painstakingly built to hold back a massive, terrifying flood of anxiety and existential panic.
Attacking the surface-level facts of their theory is like throwing pebbles at the Hoover Dam. It won't break the structure, and even if it could, it certainly won't stop the terrifying flood of illegibility waiting behind it.
And as Starr profoundly notes in the concluding thoughts of his work, a belief of this magnitude yields only when the underlying conditions that made it necessary in the first place are no longer present.
What must change, fundamentally, is not the specific belief itself that comes later.
What must be addressed first is the environment of profound instability, the loss of legibility, and the emotional isolation that made the belief structurally necessary for survival.
Which leaves us with a final, highly provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up.
We have spent this time establishing that our modern digital landscape, with its hyper-fragmented feeds, its massive volume of conflicting data, and its engagement-driven, algorithmically curated chaos, is structurally designed to break our natural interpretive engines.
It is a machine built to continuously push us past our biological threshold of uncertainty.
So the lingering question is this. If the environment is designed to break our ability to make sense of the world, are we all just one severe personal crisis, one moment of profound localized instability, away from needing our own overfitted hidden agency narrative just to survive the emotional strain?
Could the very glowing rectangular devices we hold in our hands every day, the devices we endlessly use to seek out the truth, actually be the engines forcing our desperate minds to invent it?
Think deeply about that the next time you hit a brick wall. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
This has been The Psychology of Us. The work presented here is part of a public psychological archive by R.J. Starr. It is educational and interpretive, not clinical or advisory. Episodes are published as finished reflections and are intended to be encountered as complete works.